She woke up before the sun that day, just like she always did. The small room she lived in was quiet, except for the sound of traffic far away and the slow breathing of the old woman who rented her the space. The girl sat up on her thin mattress and rubbed her tired eyes. Another long day was waiting for her, and she could already feel it in her bones. Her life had never been easy. She came from a poor family that had struggled for as long as she could remember. There was never enough money, never enough food, and never enough time to rest. Still, she tried to stay hopeful. She believed that if she kept working and stayed honest, things would slowly get better. She washed her face with cold water, tied her hair back, and changed into her only clean outfit. It was simple and worn, but she made sure it was neat. She did not want to look careless. People already judged her enough just by looking at her. Before leaving, she checked her small bag. Inside were a few coins, her old phone, and a folded piece of paper with an address written on it. That address was important. She was supposed to go there that day for a small job. It was not much, but it would help her pay rent and buy food for the week. She stepped outside into the early morning air. The sky was pale and quiet, and the streets were slowly coming to life. Vendors were setting up stalls. Buses were starting their routes. And workers like her were heading out, each carrying their own worries. As she walked, she thought about her past. She had left her village years ago after her parents passed away. There was nothing left for her there except memories and pain. The city was not kind, but it gave her chances, even if they were small. She reached a busy road and waited to cross. Cars rushed past, horns blaring. She hugged her bag close to her chest. She always did that in crowded places. Losing even one small thing could ruin her whole day. When she finally crossed and continued walking, she noticed two uniformed officers standing near a corner shop. She did not think much of it at first. Police were everywhere in the city. Still, she felt a small knot form in her stomach, a feeling she could not explain. She lowered her gaze and walked past them, hoping not to attract attention. But after a few steps, she heard a voice behind her telling her to stop. She froze. Slowly, she turned around. One of the officers was looking directly at her. His face was serious, unreadable. He asked her where she was going. Her voice shook slightly as she answered. She told him she was going to work and showed the paper with the address. He barely glanced at it. The second officer stepped closer and asked if she had any identification. She hesitated for a moment. Her ID was old and damaged, but it was all she had. She handed it over with nervous hands. They whispered to each other while looking at the card. She stood there, feeling people walk past her, some slowing down to stare. Her cheeks burned with shame. She asked politely if something was wrong. No one answered her. After a moment, one officer told her to come with them. She felt her heart drop. She asked why. Her question was ignored. Fear rushed through her body. She had done nothing wrong. She knew that. Still, her legs felt weak as they guided her toward a nearby vehicle. She tried again to ask what the problem was. This time the officer said there had been a complaint in the area, and they needed to ask her some questions. That was all he said. Her mind raced. A complaint? About what? She searched her memory, trying to find something she could have done. But there was nothing. People were staring now. Some looked curious. Others looked judgmental. No one spoke up for her. She was asked to sit in the back of the vehicle. The door closed with a loud sound that made her flinch. Through the window, she watched the street disappear as the vehicle moved. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them together, trying to calm herself. She told herself it would be fine. They would ask questions, realize their mistake, let her go. But as minutes passed, her fear only grew. They arrived at a small station. The building looked old and worn. Inside, the air was heavy and smelled of dust and sweat. She was led down a narrow hallway while people looked up from desks and benches. She was told to sit on a hard chair and wait. No one explained anything. Her phone was taken from her bag. She watched it disappear onto a table, feeling cut off from the world. Time moved slowly. Very slowly. She watched the clock on the wall, but it felt like it was mocking her. Every minute stretched longer than the last. People came and went, but no one spoke to her. Her stomach began to ache from hunger. She had not eaten breakfast, planning to eat after finishing her work. Now that plan was gone. Finally, she was called into a small room. Two officers sat across from her. They asked her questions about where she lived, where she worked, and who she knew. She answered everything honestly. She could see doubt in their eyes. One of them accused her of lying. The words hit her like a slap. Her chest tightened as she tried to defend herself. Her voice broke, but she kept talking. They asked about a crime that had happened nearby the night before. She shook her head again and again. She had been home. She had nothing to do with it. They wrote things down, barely looking at her after what felt like hours. They told her to wait again. She was taken back into the hallway, then through another door. This time, the door was heavy and cold. When it opened, her breath caught in her throat. It was a cell. The space was small, with metal bars and a concrete floor. There was no bed, just a bench against the wall. The smell was strong and unpleasant. She stood frozen, unable to believe what she was seeing. She told them there must be a mistake. She begged them to listen. The door closed. The sound echoed in her ears. She rushed to the bars and called out, "Ow," but no one answered. Her voice bounced back at her, weak and scared. She slid down to the floor, hugging her knees. Tears rolled down her face before she could stop them. She looked around the cell, trying to understand how her life had changed so fast. Just hours ago, she was walking to work, thinking about paying rent. Now she was locked inside a cell, alone. With no idea what would happen next, her heart pounded as fear slowly settled into her chest. And deep inside, a terrible thought began to grow. What if no one believed her? That thought stayed with her as the light outside began to fade. And the first long hours of her nightmare truly began. The cell felt colder as time passed. At first, she thought it was just fear making her shiver, but soon her body truly felt the chill. The concrete floor pulled warmth from her skin, and the air smelled old and heavy. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to stay calm, trying not to panic. She stood up and walked slowly from one end of the cell to the other. It only took a few steps. The space was smaller than she had imagined. The metal bars were thick and scratched, marked by hands that had held them before hers. That thought made her chest tighten even more. She called out again, asking if anyone was there. Her voice echoed down the hallway, then disappeared. No answer came back. It felt like she had been forgotten already. She checked the small window high on the wall. Light came through, but it was fading. Evening was approaching. She pressed her fingers against the wall beneath it, as if she could reach the outside world through the stone. Her thoughts would not stay still. They jumped from one fear to another. What if they kept her here all night? What if they blamed her for something she did not do? What if no one ever came to ask her questions again? She tried to remind herself that she was innocent. She repeated it quietly, like a prayer. She had done nothing wrong. Still, the walls did not seem to care. After some time, she heard footsteps. Her heart raced as she stood up quickly and moved to the bars. A guard walked past without looking at her. She called out, asking when she could leave, or at least speak to someone. The guard did not stop. Her hope fell just as fast as it had risen. Hours passed without any clear sign of time. There was no clock in the cell. Only her body told her how long it had been. Hunger returned, sharper now. Her mouth felt dry. She wondered if it was already night. From somewhere far away, she heard other voices. Some were angry, some tired, some laughing. It confused her. How could anyone laugh in a place like this? She sat back on the bench and rested her head against the wall. Memories came without warning. She remembered her parents, their faces tired but kind. She remembered promises she had made to herself after they were gone. She had promised to survive no matter what. Tears slipped down her face again. She wiped them quickly, embarrassed even though no one was watching. At one point, a woman was pushed into the cell next to hers. She looked scared and confused too. They exchanged brief words through the bars. The woman asked why she was there. She answered honestly that she did not know. The woman shook her head and said, "This place did not care about reasons. Those words stayed with her long after the woman was taken away again. The light outside the small window turned dark. Night had fully arrived. Her stomach growled loudly, and she felt dizzy. She wondered if anyone remembered that she was there. She tried to sleep but could not. Every sound startled her. The clanging of doors, distant shouting, footsteps in the hallway. Each noise reminded her how powerless she was. She curled up on the bench using her bag as a pillow. The surface was hard and uncomfortable. Her back ached, but she did not move. Lying still felt safer. Her thoughts turned darker. She imagined worst outcomes, unfair judgments, days turning into weeks. She imagined walking out and finding that her life outside had fallen apart. Rent unpaid, work gone. No one waiting for her. She whispered to herself that morning would come. Morning always came. She held on to that thought tightly. At some point during the night, exhaustion finally pulled her into shallow sleep. It did not last long. She woke suddenly, her heart racing, unsure of what had startled her. For a moment, she did not remember where she was. Then the bars came into view and reality rushed back. She sat up, breathing heavily. Her hands were trembling. She pressed them together and closed her eyes, counting her breaths like she once learned to do during hard times. More hours passed. Her body felt weak now. Hunger and fear had drained her. She stood again, hoping movement would help. She paced slowly, careful not to slip on the cold floor. Near dawn, the hallway grew quieter. The loud sounds of the night faded into silence. She watched the small window, waiting for light. When the first soft glow appeared, she felt a small sense of relief. She had survived the night, but relief did not mean freedom. Morning footsteps returned. A guard stopped briefly in front of her cell. She stood quickly and asked if she could make a call. He told her to wait. That word again. She waited. Her throat felt tight as she swallowed back tears. She wondered if anyone outside had noticed her absence. The old woman she rented from, the person who was expecting her for work, would they think she had simply disappeared? She pressed her forehead against the bars, feeling the cold metal against her skin. Anger slowly joined her fear. Not loud anger, but a quiet one that burned deep inside. She thought about how easily her freedom had been taken. No proof, no explanation, just suspicion and silence. As the morning grew brighter, she promised herself one thing. If she ever walked out of this place, she would never forget how this felt. And even though no one seemed to believe her now, she knew the truth. She was still waiting when footsteps approached again, heavier this time. Voices stopped near her cell. Keys jingled. Her heart pounded as she stood straight. Unsure whether hope or fear was stronger, something was about to happen. She did not know if it would save her, or break her even more. The morning light slowly filled the hallway outside, but inside the cell, time felt suspended. She had been waiting for what seemed like hours, though she had lost track of time entirely. Hunger gnawed at her, but the emptiness of her stomach was nothing compared to the weight pressing down on her heart. She paced the small space again, pressing her palms against the cold walls. Each movement felt heavy, like her body refused to obey her commands. She thought about the people outside, about the world that was moving on without her. Work, rent, meals, conversations, all continuing as if she had vanished into thin air. The thought made her chest ache. She returned to the bench and sat, wrapping her arms around her knees. Her eyes scanned every corner of the cell, trying to find comfort in familiarity. There was none. Only concrete, metal, and silence. The previous night had left marks on her soul. She remembered every sound, the slamming of doors, the distant shouting, the echoing footsteps, and each one made her flinch even now. The fear had not left her. It had taken residence inside her, small but unrelenting. She tried to focus on breathing, in and out, slow and steady. She counted each breath, each exhale. The exercise helped a little, but only temporarily. Her mind wandered, filled with questions that had no answers. Why was she here? Who had complained? Why did no one listen? Every thought seemed to twist in on itself, creating new worries she hadn't had before. The unknown was worse than anything else. Then came a noise, a faint scraping sound. She froze immediately, straining her ears. The sound came from the corner of the cell where the bars met the wall. She stepped closer, heart pounding. There was nothing. Just the shadows moving slightly as the morning light shifted. A memory surfaced, her mother's voice. Long ago, telling her to stay calm in the face of trouble, to hold her head high even when no one supported her. She tried to remember that calm, that strength. She tried to summon it, but fear was stubborn. It clung to her like a second skin. Minutes passed, then hours, though she could not be sure. Her body was tired, but sleep refused to come. Every time her eyes closed, her mind replayed every possible outcome of her situation, all terrible. She imagined being accused, ignored, trapped here for days. She imagined being blamed for something she did not do. The thought made her shiver. To distract herself, she started to talk quietly, almost whispering to herself. She spoke of the life she had outside, of small joys and simple routines. She spoke of meals she had enjoyed, of the sound of rain against the roof, of the laughter she sometimes shared with neighbors. Her voice was soft, but speaking helped her feel a small connection to the world outside, a reminder that it still existed. Hours dragged on. The hallway outside grew quieter. Occasionally, she could hear a faint voice, maybe someone speaking to another officer. The words were indistinct, but they reminded her that people were moving around her. The world was not completely still, even if she felt abandoned. Her stomach growled again. The ache was sharper now. She had not eaten for more than a day, and the weakness was beginning to show. She tried to ignore it, but her body demanded attention. She pressed her hands against it, hoping the discomfort would fade by mid-morning. She had resigned herself to sitting on the bench, leaning against the wall. Her eyes wandered to the small window again. The sky outside was blue, clouds drifting lazily. It seemed unfair that she could see freedom so clearly, so close, yet feel it entirely out of reach. She thought about the woman who had been in the cell next to hers the night before. The memory of her voice, scared and confused, came back. They had shared a brief connection, a small acknowledgement of each other's humanity. That memory brought a mix of comfort and sorrow. She wished someone could tell her why she was here, just as the other woman had wished. Her mind turned to what she would do if she were released. She imagined walking out of this place, breathing fresh air, seeing the streets filled with life. She imagined going to her work, explaining the situation, trying to reclaim the life that had been paused. But even in that imagined scenario, doubt crept in. What if no one believed her? What if this nightmare left marks that could not be erased? She pressed her face against the bars and let herself cry silently. There was no shame in it, she told herself. No one could see. No one could judge. The tears were hers, a release from the tension coiled tightly inside her as the day wore on. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows through the small window. The warmth of sunlight was faint, but comforting. It reminded her that the world outside existed, that people still moved, still lived, still cared in ways she could not see. A guard finally appeared in the hallway. He looked at her briefly, then moved on. Her hopes surged and faltered at the same time. Each approach brought a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. Would this be the moment of freedom, or another round of silence and waiting? She returned to pacing, each step measured and slow. Her mind circled back to the same questions, the same worries. Each repetition felt like a test of her patience, a challenge to her spirit. She tried to imagine herself stronger, braver, more capable of facing the unknown. In the quiet, she began to hum softly a tune her mother used to sing long ago. The sound filled the cell, fragile but defiant. It reminded her that even here, even in this small, cold space, she could claim a fragment of herself, a spark that no one could take away. Hours passed without interruption. She lost count of time entirely. The hum became a mantra, a steady rhythm to anchor her mind. She whispered the words, sometimes softly, sometimes louder, letting the sound chase away the creeping despair. Her body ached from sitting, pacing, and the strain of tension that never let go. Her hands were raw from gripping the cold bars, her back stiff from leaning against the wall. Yet, she found small ways to care for herself. adjusting her position, rubbing her eyes, flexing her fingers. These small acts were reminders that she was still here, still human, still capable of endurance. As the day stretched into the afternoon, the cell felt smaller, more oppressive. The walls seemed to lean in, and the air grew heavier. She focused on breathing, on the hum, on fragments of memory that gave her comfort. She reminded herself repeatedly that this would end somehow, that she would not always be trapped. She could not know when or how, but she refused to let despair claim her completely. Even in the silence, even in the cold, even in the waiting. She clung to that stubborn hope. The afternoon sun finally began to soften, casting warm, golden light through the window. It touched the floor, the walls, and her face. She closed her eyes and let herself feel the warmth. It was brief, but it reminded her that there was life outside, that she was still a part of it. Somewhere deep inside, a quiet strength began to grow. Not loud or obvious, but steady. It reminded her that she had survived hardships before, that she could survive this too. She would not let fear define her. She would not let this place break her spirit. And so she waited, patient and tense, fragile and strong. For the next moment, that might change everything. The afternoon stretched on, sunlight changing slowly through the small window in the cell. She had been pacing and sitting, leaning and standing, trying to keep herself awake and aware. Each hour felt endless. Hunger and fatigue gnawed at her, but fear and uncertainty were even stronger. Her mind could not rest. Even when her body begged for it, she pressed her hands to the cold metal bars, wishing she could push them aside and step into freedom. The walls, so solid and unmoving, seemed to press in on her. She whispered again that it had to end, that someone would notice, that someone would finally understand that she had done nothing wrong. Minutes turned into hours. Or maybe it was seconds. The passage of time had lost all meaning. She could hear footsteps outside occasionally, the murmur of voices, doors opening and closing, the clanging of metal. Each sound made her tense, made her hope and fear rise at the same time. She wanted someone to come and tell her what was happening, but she feared the answer might never come. Her stomach ached. Hunger was now a constant reminder that she was trapped. Her mouth was dry, and her throat felt raw from talking and calling out for help. She pressed her palms against her stomach and took shallow breaths, trying to ignore the discomfort. She had survived worse, she reminded herself, but this was different. This was not just about survival. It was about being forgotten, being trapped for no reason. She thought about her life outside, about her small routines that now seemed like luxuries, buying groceries, walking along the streets, laughing quietly with neighbors. The freedom she had once taken for granted felt impossible now. She longed for even the simplest things, the smell of fresh bread, the warmth of sunlight on her face, the sound of people talking outside. Hours passed slowly, each one heavier than the last. She tried to occupy her mind by recalling memories, by repeating comforting phrases to herself, by imagining conversations that had never happened. She spoke softly, almost in a whisper, telling herself stories to keep her mind alive. The act of speaking, even quietly, made her feel connected to the world outside, to a reality that was still moving. Then came another sound, faint but distinct, key turning in a lock. Her heart leaped. She ran to the bars, pressing her face forward. The door creaked open, and she froze. A figure stood there, but it was not clear if this person would be a savior or another challenge. Fear mixed with hope so tightly that she could not separate them. The guard said nothing at first. He just looked at her briefly and moved past. Her breath caught, and she waited, trying to read what would happen next. Hours of silence had left her on edge. Every movement outside the cell seemed louder, more significant. She returned to pacing, her mind racing. What if this was not the end? What if they still had questions she could not answer? What if they blamed her regardless of her truth? The unknown pressed down, heavy and relentless. Her thoughts wandered to those who might be waiting for her outside. The old woman who rented her room? The small shop owner who had agreed to give her work that day. Did they notice she had not arrived? Did they wonder where she was? The thought of leaving them in worry made her chest tighten. Night had begun to approach, again when a small piece of food was slid under the door. She stared at it, unsure if she could eat. Her body screamed with hunger, but her mind hesitated. Was this a test? A trick? Finally, she picked it up, grateful for the sustenance, and ate slowly. It reminded her that even in despair, someone somewhere had remembered that she existed. After that, she sat against the wall, eating slowly and feeling the warmth return to her hands. She felt a small spark of life, a reminder that she could still endure. She repeated silently that she would survive this, that she had to. She thought again about the woman from the neighboring cell. Did she manage to leave? Was she safe? The memory of her voice, her fear, resonated with the girl. In that moment, she realized she was not alone, even if she felt completely isolated. There were others who had endured fear and misunderstanding, and they had survived. Her mind continued to cycle through the same questions. Why was she here? How long would it last? Who had complained? Would anyone ever understand her side? Each unanswered question felt heavier than the last, pressing on her spirit by evening. She had accepted a small truth. She could not control what had happened, but she could control how she reacted. She could not speed up time or force explanations, but she could stay awake, alert, and alive. That quiet resolve became a shield, fragile but real. The hallway outside grew quieter as the evening deepened. Only faint footsteps and the distant sound of voices reminded her that life continued beyond her walls. She listened carefully, trying to glean information, to guess what might happen next. Each sound was significant, each movement a clue. Her body ached from hunger and lack of rest. She leaned against the wall, closed her eyes, and took slow, deliberate breaths. She pictured herself outside, walking freely, feeling the sun on her skin and the wind on her face. The image helped her maintain some sense of hope, some connection to the world she had been torn from. Suddenly, she heard voices closer to her cell. The sound of keys jingling made her heart race. The door opened slowly, and a guard stepped inside. This time, there was a change in his tone, a hint that something might finally be different. Her chest tightened with anticipation and anxiety. She asked quietly if she could know why she had been held. The guard did not answer immediately. He just looked at her, then motioned for her to follow. Her legs were unsteady, but she obeyed, gripping the bars for balance. The hallway seemed longer now, more intimidating. She walked carefully, aware of every sound and shadow. Her mind raced with questions, fears, and hopes. Would this finally be the moment of freedom? Would someone finally listen and believe her? When the door opened to a larger room, she was not sure what to expect. People were there, sitting behind desks, looking at her with expressions she could not read. She tried to stand tall, to show that she was not broken. Even if fear had left marks on her face, one of the people spoke finally. They asked her questions again, but this time differently. There was a tension in their eyes, a willingness to listen. Her answers came more freely, her voice steadying as she spoke. She felt a flicker of relief, a small reassurance that her truth was finally being heard. As the evening deepened, she realized that the end of her ordeal was near. She did not yet know the outcome, but the momentum had shifted. Hope, fragile but real, began to replace despair. She could imagine stepping outside again, breathing freely, seeing the streets alive and moving around her. Her heart still raced. But for the first time in nearly a full day, it was not from fear alone. It was from anticipation, from the possibility that this nightmare could end, that she could reclaim even a piece of the life that had been paused as she sat. Listening to the voices and waiting for what would come next, she promised herself one thing, no matter what happened. She would not let this experience break her completely. She would survive. She would endure. And when she walked out of that place, she would carry the memory of this day as a reminder of her strength, her courage. Evening had fully fallen when she was finally let out of the cell. Her legs were unsteady, her body aching from hours of sitting, pacing, and waiting. Each step felt heavy, like carrying a weight she could not see. Yet, a flicker of hope had returned, fragile but persistent. The hallway seemed endless as she walked between guards and past closed doors. Every sound made her tense, every shadow felt like it might hide another challenge. She held herself upright, repeating in her mind that she had survived this far, and she would survive what came next. At last, she entered a room where people were seated behind desks. Their expressions were calm, serious, attentive. The shift in energy was noticeable. For the first time, she felt that someone might actually hear her. She was asked questions again, but now the tone was different. They listened carefully, made notes, and occasionally nodded. She answered honestly, explaining what had happened, her location, her movements, her lack of involvement in anything wrong. Her voice, though tired, carried a quiet strength. She had been through hours of uncertainty and fear, yet she still spoke the truth. After a while, one of them finally said she could leave. Her heart leaped. She blinked, unsure if it was real. She asked for confirmation. The words repeated, firm and clear. She was free to go. Relief crashed over her in waves. Tears sprang to her eyes, but this time they were tears of release, of hope, of endurance. A guard led her back through the hallways, each step lighter than the last. She no longer feared the shadows, no longer flinched at the sounds. Each movement toward the exit felt like reclaiming a piece of herself that had been trapped for nearly a day. The door to the outside opened, and the cool night air hit her face. Stars shone above, distant and calm. The city was alive with lights, movement, sound. It was overwhelming at first, but it reminded her that life continued. That the world did not stop for her suffering, but it did not have to define her either. She walked slowly, taking it all in, grateful for each breath, each step, each sound. The streets were not empty. People moved past her, some glancing briefly, others not noticing at all. She felt invisible and yet completely alive. She thought about the people who might have been worried. The old woman who rented her room, the shop owner waiting for her that morning. She hoped they had not given up, that they had noticed her absence, that they had worried in the ways people care. The thought made her chest tighten, but it also reminded her that human connection mattered. Even when distant, she found a small, quiet corner and paused, breathing deeply. Her body ached from hunger, fatigue, and tension, but her spirit felt lighter. She had endured something unfair, frightening, and unknown. She had survived. That was enough for now. She reflected on the ordeal she had just faced. Every hour in that cell had tested her patience, courage, and faith in the world. Fear had been constant, loneliness, overwhelming. Yet she had found ways to endure, to hold on. To remind herself that she was human and her truth mattered. The experience left her changed. She knew she could not return to life exactly as it had been. The memory of being locked away for no reason would stay with her. She would carry it quietly, like a mark of resilience. A reminder that even in helplessness, she had not surrendered. She thought about the woman in the neighboring cell and the brief connection they had shared. She wondered if others had experienced similar injustices, if anyone else had been trapped without reason. She hoped they, too, found their way out, that they, too, reclaimed their freedom as she walked through the city. She noticed small details she had once overlooked, the laughter of children, the smell of food from a nearby stall, the wind rustling through trees. Each detail was a reminder that life moved forward, that the world continued to exist in its ordinary ways. Even when moments of chaos intruded, eventually, she returned to the small room she rented. The old woman inside looked worried but relieved. They embraced briefly, words unnecessary. The girl felt the warmth of human care, small but powerful reminder that she was not alone. She unpacked her small bag, ate a simple meal, and allowed herself to rest. Sleep came slowly, her mind replaying the events of the day, the fear, the hunger, the isolation. But amidst it all was gratitude for survival, for freedom, for small acts of kindness from strangers. Would not ignored her entirely. She reflected quietly on the lessons she had learned. Life could be unfair. People could act without reason. Yet, even in the darkest hours, one could endure. One could survive, even when the world seemed silent or indifferent. By the time the night deepened, she felt a quiet resolve settle within her. she would not allow this experience to define her entirely. She would continue to live, to work, to care for herself and others. Her strength had been tested, and she had found it. Though the fear lingered, though questions remained unanswered, she knew she had reclaimed something essential: her dignity, her voice, her right to exist without blame. That knowledge, fragile but real, would carry her forward. In the quiet of her small room, she whispered a promise to herself. She would not forget this day, but she would not be defeated by it. She would face the world again, stronger and wiser, carrying the memory as both a warning and a testament to human resilience. The ordeal had ended, but its lessons would remain. She had survived the night, the fear, the uncertainty. She had emerged still herself, still human, still capable of hope. And that, above all, was something no cell could ever take away. The next morning, she woke up slowly, her body still aching from the long ordeal of the previous day. Sunlight streamed softly through the small window of her room. The familiar sounds of the street outside greeted her like a gentle promise. For the first time in hours, she felt a measure of peace. But it was mixed with the lingering weight of what had happened. She sat on the edge of her mattress and reflected on the events of the past. 24 hours. Locked in a cell for no reason, ignored, and forgotten by people who should have cared, was an experience she would never forget. Her mind wandered through each moment. The fear, the hunger, the silence, and the uncertainty. Even now it felt surreal. It's like a story she had been told rather than one she had lived. Despite the trauma, there was also a quiet pride within her. She had survived, and in surviving, she had discovered a resilience she had never known she possessed. She understood now that strength was not always loud or visible. Sometimes it was found in quiet endurance, in the ability to keep going when the world seemed to have abandoned you. She stood slowly, stretching her sore muscles. The small room felt safe in comparison to the cold, unyielding cell she had endured. She took a deep breath and looked around, noticing the small details she had often overlooked before: the chipped paint on the walls, the worn rug on the floor, the soft hum of the fan above. These simple things grounded her, reminding her that life continued beyond fear and pain. Her thoughts turned to the people who had unknowingly played a part in her survival. The guards, though unhelpful at first, had eventually guided her to safety. The strangers at the station had finally listened. Even the distant presence of other detainees reminded her that she was not alone in experiencing injustice. These reflections gave her a new perspective on human nature. People could be careless or indifferent, but they could also show moments of understanding and compassion. She decided to go out into the street, to reconnect with the world she had been absent from for so long. The sun was warm on her face, and the air felt fresh and full of possibility. Each step she took felt heavier and lighter at the same time. Heavier because of the exhaustion still clinging to her body. Lighter because freedom had never felt so vivid as she walked. She noticed small signs of life that had once seemed mundane but now felt remarkable. A child laughed while playing with a makeshift ball. A vendor shouted greetings to passersby, and the smell of freshly baked bread filled the air. Each detail was a reminder that the world did not stop for fear or injustice. It continued, and she was a part of it again. She paused outside a small cafe, watching people move in and out, sharing smiles, conversations, and simple joys. She realized that connection was something she had missed profoundly. The isolation of the cell had emphasized how human life relied on interaction, on acknowledgement, on being seen. She longed to rebuild those connections, to be part of a world that sometimes overlooked people like her. Her thoughts then shifted to the larger questions. Why had this happened, and who had been responsible? She did not have answers, and for a moment, the frustration threatened to overwhelm her. But she reminded herself that she could not control everything. The injustice she faced was unfair, but she could control how she moved forward. She could reclaim her life and ensure that her story did not end in silence. Determined, she decided to speak to someone she trusted, someone who might help her process what had occurred. She visited the small office where her work had been arranged, and the shop owner welcomed her with concern. She recounted her ordeal, explaining in detail how she had been taken, locked, and ignored. The listener was shocked but attentive, validating her experience and offering support. For the first time, she felt truly believed, and the weight of disbelief that had followed her began to lift. Encouraged by this, she thought about others who might have suffered similar fates. She realized that her experience, while personal, was not unique. Many people were dismissed, overlooked, and misjudged simply because they lacked power or status. She felt a growing sense of purpose. Her story could be a voice for those who were unheard. She spent the afternoon writing down every detail of her experience. She wrote not just to remember, but to process, to give form to the chaos of her emotions, to turn fear into clarity. Each word helped her regain control, turning helplessness into action, uncertainty into understanding. The act of writing was liberating, and she felt her confidence slowly returning. Later, she reached out to a local community organization, sharing her story and seeking guidance on how to advocate for herself and others. The people there listened carefully, offered advice, and encouraged her to continue speaking up. This support reminded her that while the world could be cruel, it could also be compassionate. Allies existed, and she could find them if she sought them. Evening came, and she returned to her small room. The room felt different now, safer, warmer, and filled with possibility. She reflected on the day, understanding that survival was not just about enduring fear, but also about reclaiming agency, about making choices that reinforced her humanity. She thought about how she would handle future challenges. Fear and uncertainty were inevitable, but she had learned that endurance, clarity, and seeking support could transform those challenges into manageable experiences. The ordeal had changed her, but not broken her. It had sharpened her awareness, strengthened her resolve, and deepened her appreciation for freedom and human connection. As night fell, she looked out the window, the city lights twinkling below. She realized that life was moving forward, not waiting for her, but she could move with it. The past 24 hours had been harrowing, yet they had also illuminated a path forward, a path where she could exist fully. With awareness, courage, and the willingness to speak her truth, she took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and empowerment. The fear of being forgotten, misunderstood, or trapped lingered faintly, but it no longer defined her. She had survived, she had endured, and she had reclaimed her voice. Before resting, she whispered quietly to herself, acknowledging her strength, her resilience, and her newfound clarity. She knew the experience would stay with her, a reminder of both vulnerability and courage. And as she finally allowed herself to sleep, she did so with a sense of peace. Knowing that she had faced the darkness and emerged still whole, still human, and still capable of hope,